Hi everyone. Sorry again that I can't be there with you today. I'm still at ACT testing, but we will have class on Monday, and I look forward to meeting with all of you again. Until then, let's do another video lesson, shall we? All right, so today we're going to be reading a model millionaire, and to get our minds into the story, I want you to consider a couple of questions. First, what would you do if you were a millionaire? Would you be charitable? Would you buy a bunch of stuff? Would you start your own business? What would you do if you, in fact, had $1 million? And then I also want you to think about this. Have you ever encountered an unexpected moment of kindness? So I want you to think about that, and I'd love to hear your stories if you ever have encountered that unexpected moment of kindness. I know for me, when my family and we were having the worst day. Oh my gosh, it was such a bad day. We were driving home from West Virginia, and we stopped at the Bob Evans in Eastern Ohio. My daughter had gotten car sick. Kids were tired, and we stopped in Bob Evans, and we just sat and we had lunch before we headed on home. And an elderly couple actually came up to us, and they paid for our meal, and they said some nice things about our family and went about their day. And man, I can just tell you that that was a moment of kindness that my family, especially my husband and I, needed at the moment. And I'll never forget that kind moment. I plan to pay that forward when I'm older and I see a young couple with two small kids too. So all right, so I'd love to hear your moments of kindness. So today's goal is we're gonna be reading and analyzing A Model Millionaire by Oscar Wilde, and I really recommend that you read and watch his background information that's in the class. We're gonna learn a little bit about this author. This is a really good story, and it's later in Victorian period, so we're starting to see that sense of hope. But there is definitely still some division of social classes and how the poor is viewed and how the rich viewed the poor. So we're gonna read this story. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. Unless one is wealthy, there is no use in being a charming fellow. Romance is the privilege of the rich, not the profession of the unemployed. The poor should be practical and prosaic. It is better to have a permanent income than to be fascinating. These are the great truths of modern life which Huey Erskine never realized. Poor Huey! Intellectually, we must admit, he was not of much importance. He never said a brilliant or even an ill-natured thing in his life. But then he was wonderfully good-looking, with his crisp brown hair, his clear-cut profile, and his gray eyes. He was as popular with men as he was with women, and he had every accomplishment except that of making money. His father had bequeathed him his cavalry sword and a history of the Peninsular War in 15 volumes. Hughie hung the first over his looking-glass, put the second on a shelf between Ruff's Guide and Bailey's Magazine, and lived on 200 a year that an old aunt allowed him. He had tried everything. He had gone on the stock exchange for 6 months, but what was a butterfly to do among bulls and bears? He had a tea merchant. He had been a tea merchant for a little longer, but had soon tired of Pico and Sochon. Then he tried selling dry sherry. They did not answer. The sherry was a little too dry. Ultimately, he became nothing. A delightful, ineffectual young man with a perfect profile and no profession. All right. So, a couple things I want you to know here at the beginning of the story. One, a model millionaire. Think about that title, because that's going to come in importance here later. Secondly, think about Huey. What kind of characteristics are we noticing? What kind of person is he? Okay, he's not a man who's rich. And what is a butterfly to do among the bulls and bears? So what does that say about his personality? What is a butterfly? It's beautiful, but it's not as strong as a bull. It's not as vicious as a bull. It's not as attacking as a bull. So he wasn't going to be successful on the stock exchange. He's not a salesman. So he's really not amounting to much when it comes um, to money, but he is attractive. He is kind. He is, he's successful in every way except for in money, in the terms of wealth. To make matters worse, he was in love. The girl he loved was Laura Menton, the daughter of a retired colonel who had lost his temper and his digestion in India, and had never found either of them again. Laura adored him, and he was ready to kiss her shoestrings. They were the handsomest couple in London, and had not a penny piece between them. The colonel was fond of Hughie, but would not hear of any engagement. "Come to me, my boy, when you have got £10,000 of your own, and we will see about it," he used to say. And Hughie looked very glum on those days, and had to go to Laura for consolation. All right, so think about, why can't Hughie marry Laura? The colonel has a very strict amount of money that he wants Hughie to bring in a year. He wants his daughter to be taken care of financially. So they love each other. Hughie worships the ground that she walks on, but that doesn't matter to the colonel. He won't hear of the engagement until Hughie can provide for a family. One morning, as he was on his way to Holland Park, where the Mertons lived, he dropped in to see a great friend of his, Alan Trevor. Trevor was a painter. Indeed, few people escape that nowadays. But he was also an artist, and artists are rather rare. Personally, he was a strange rough fellow, with a freckled face and a red ragged beard. However, when he took up the brush, he was a real master, and his pictures were eagerly sought after. He had been very much attracted by Hughie at first, it must be acknowledged, entirely on account of his personal charm. The only people a painter should know, he used to say, are people who are bête and beautiful. People who are artistic, an artistic pleasure to look at, and an intellectual repose to talk to. Men who are dandies and women who are darlings rule the world. At least they should do so. However, after he got to know Hughie better, he liked him quite as much for his bright, buoyant spirits and his generous, reckless nature, and had given him permanent entree to his studio. All right. So, what are some of the characteristics of Alan Trevor? What does he look like? He's a painter, right? He's a very successful artist, and his paintings are sought after by everybody. But what kind of company does he keep? He's very particular about the type of people he's willing to hang out with. All right, and he likes Hughie. And look at this paragraph here. Why does he like Hughie? His bright and buoyant spirits, his generous, reckless nature. So he lets him into his studio whenever he wants. When Hughie came in, he found Trevor putting the finishing touches to a wonderful sized picture of a beggar man. The beggar himself was standing on a raised platform in a corner of the studio. He was a wizened old man with a face like wrinkled parchment, and the most piteous expression. Over his shoulders was flung a coarse brown cloak, all tears and tatters. His thick boots were patched and cobbled, and with one hand he leant on a rough stick, while with the other he held a battered hat for alms. "What an amazing model!" whispered Hughie as he shook hands with his friend. "An amazing model!" shouted Trevor at the top of his voice. "I should think so. Such beggars as he are not to be met with every day. A Trouvaille, mon cher, and a living Velazquez. My stars, what an etching Rembrandt would have made of him." "Poor old chap," said Hughie. "How miserable he looks! But I suppose to you painters his face is fortune." "Certainly," replied Trevor. "You don't want a beggar to look happy, do you?" "How much does the model get for sitting?" asked Hughie, as he found himself a comfortable seat in the divan. "A shilling an hour." "And how much do you get for your picture, Alan?" Oh, for this I get 2,000 pounds, guineas. Painters, poets, and physicians always get guineas. Well, I think the model should have a percentage, cried Hughie, laughing. They work quite as hard as you do. Nonsense, nonsense. Why, look at the trouble of laying on the paint alone, and standing all day long at one's easel. It's all very well, Hughie, for you to talk, but I assure you that there are moments when art almost attains to the dignity of manual labor. But you mustn't chatter. I'm very busy. Smoke a cigarette and keep quiet. All right. So Huey's making some interesting observations about how much the beggar man's getting paid versus how much Alan would get paid for his painting, right? After some time, the servant came in and told Trevor that the frame maker wanted to speak to him. Don't run away, Hughie, he said as he went out. I will be back in a moment. The old beggar man took advantage of Trevor's absence to rest for a moment on a wooden bench that was behind him. He looked so forlorn and wretched that Hughie could not help pitying him, and felt his pockets to see what money he had. All he could find was a sovereign and some coppers. Poor old fellow, he thought to himself. He wants it more than I do, but it means no hansoms for a fortnight. And he walked across the studio and slipped the sovereign into the beggar's hand. The old man started, and a faint smile flitted across his withered lips. Thank you, sir, he said. Thank you. Then Trevor arrived, and Hughie took his leave, blushing a little at what he had done. He spent the day with Laura, got a charming scolding for his extravagance, and had to walk home. That night he strolled to the Palette Club about 11 o'clock and found Trevor sitting by himself in the smoking room, drinking hock and seltzer. Well, Alan, did you get the picture finished all right? He said as he lit his cigarette. Finished and framed, my boy, answered Trevor. And, by the by, you have made a conquest. That old model you saw is quite devoted to you. I had to tell him all about you. Who you are, where you live, what your income is, what prospects you have. My dear Alan, cried Hughie, I shall probably find him waiting for me when I go home. But of course, you are only joking. Poor old wretch. I wish I could do something for him. I think it's dreadful that anyone should be so miserable. I've got heaps of old clothes at home. Do you think he would care for any of them? Why, his rags were falling to bits. But he looks splendid in them, said Trevor. I wouldn't paint him in a frock coat for anything. What you call rags, I call romance. What seems poverty to you is picturesqueness to me. However, I'll tell him of your offer. Alan, said Hughie seriously, you painters are a heartless lot. An artist's heart is in his head, replied Trevor. And besides, our business is to realize the world as we see it, not to reform it as we know it. Chacun son métier. There's a lot of French in this if you can't tell. And now tell me, how is Laura? The old model was quite interested in her. You don't mean to say you talked to him about her, said Hughie. Certainly I did. He knows all about the relentless colonel, the lovely Laura, and the 10,000 pounds. You told that old beggar all about my private affairs, cried Hughie, looking very red and angry. My dear boy, said Trevor, smiling, that old beggar, as you call him, is one of the richest men in Europe. He could go buy all London tomorrow without overdrawing his account. He has a house in every capital, dines off gold plate, and can prevent Russia going to war when he chooses. What on earth do you mean? What I say, said Trevor. The old man you saw today in the studio was Baron Hosberg. He's a great friend of mine, buys all my pictures and that sort of thing, and gave me a commission a month ago to paint him as a beggar. Que voulez voir? La fantaisie un millionaire. And I must say, he made a magnificent figure in his rags. Or perhaps, I should say, in my rags. They are an old suit I got in Spain. All right, so as you're going to finish reading this and see what happens to dear old Hughie after finding this out. Think about what's the possible theme of the story. how it connects to major ideas of the Victorian age. Any questions? Let me know, okay? Have a